Good morning, fine folks and fogies. So, today I need to talk about something that's really near and dear to my heart because it is a serious epidemic. And, I mean, yeah, I've lost a lot of people because of it. I almost died myself because of it back in the day when I was shooting up shitty drugs. Actually, I did die. I flatlined and was very nearly on death's doorstep entirely, like being yanked through. Luckily death didn't answer and I was resuscitated by like 6 paramedics, but um, it was a close one. I'll say that much. But, so many of my friends, they haven't been so lucky. I mean, last year alone, two of my friends lost their fathers as a result. And this issue is fentanyl, a drug called fentanyl that is being sent over from labs in China. So, like, literally, we have addicts in my city, and my city's got some of the worst drug abuse numbers, and like serious drug abuse numbers in all the cities in North America, which is like startling, and that's it's an open wound, it's an open secret in this city because everyone goes by it every single day. There's entire portions of the city that are just populated essentially by people who have been drug addicts for a really long time, and you can tell just by their countenance and how they carry themselves, their gait, that they've been using for a long time because it does, especially opioids, it does change you on like a physiological level, on a cellular level even. And there's just a lot of very sketchy stuff I see going on from drug companies, and the government seems to be doing really like fuck all about it at the end of the day. Um, and there's so much recourse that, I mean, it's not even funny, but so much potential for recourse, I should say, because without the government's blessing, without the blessing of Big Brother, we can't operate as autonomous adults and, put what we want into our bodies. Fentanyl, I'd say, hit the scene maybe 10 years ago, like when I was an addict. I started on Oxycontin, moved to heroin, and I tried to stay on heroin. And I did for the most part. But then I found my dealer started cutting the heroin he was selling me with fentanyl because I'd get my shit tested. That's, always get your shit tested no matter where it comes from, unless you have a test sheet like you've gotten it from a lab, which I get much of my stuff from labs. Then get it tested. It's not too difficult. Won't take that much of your time. Could potentially save your life. Worth it. But heroin it's an albino one-eyed fucking rhino in the city because you can't find actual heroin. There was a place called the Vandu that tried to give out free heroin, clean heroin, but they did it maybe once, ran out of supplies very quickly. It became very chaotic. People were just selling the heroin they got so they could get the fentanyl. And like that's really the only lick we've seen of it. Yeah, I mean, in any case, like it's messed up because it's not just fentanyl now that people are doing. They're ordering fentanyl and a Tislam. Tislam used to be legal in Canada about a year ago. It's thiobenzodiazepine, and I actually used to order it because it was illegal. I could order 99% pure powder. It just need a tiny amount. It's very easy to overdose on that. I had a couple exes who took some, and like for 6 hours, they're just like, I could barely wake up, and it's just like all I could do is just kind of shake them and like hope they would wake up, and luckily they did. But yeah, in any case, the addicts now, despite the Islam being regulated, they're mixing it themselves with fentanyl, and I've seen what down looks like these days. It's pretty disgusting. It looks like, someone took a bunch of like those nerd candies, stuck them up their nose, and just loogied them onto the ground. But like, I think the reason fentanyl is preferred is because it has like an anesthetic property to it. It's like, I've done it myself when I was an addict, and it's not euphoric like heroin. It's much stronger too. You just kind of like, you're like, I never mixed it with a benzo though, because that's dangerous. That's, you're like the number one rule of thumb when you're using drugs is you don't mix two the same. You don't mix two uppers. You don't mix two downers. I mean, depending on what it is, with uppers it's a little more safe, but still, that's not advised. With downers, you're asking for an overdose. That's why you're not supposed to drink and do a downer. Like, you're not supposed to do benzos, drink, or whatever. Because you're going to depress your respiratory system so much that you could very well die as a result. But because of the addition of Tislam, naloxone kits aren't working anymore. You can't resuscitate someone who's overdosed as a result of benzos and opioids, and because of the continuous demonization of drugs, addicts are using behind closed doors, especially fledgling addicts. People who have families, people who have jobs, they're hiding it as much as possible, and they may even just have a habit that's starting up and they don't have physical dependence yet. They'll overdose before they get there, and I've seen that happen with people. That has happened many times. Another issue with fentanyl, like many of my friends who've died from it, because when I was a drug addict, I cut ties from most of my friends. I didn't want them to see me using. I didn't want it to, because drug addiction is contagious in a way. Like people, for me, I became normalized to it because an ex of mine was using it around me, heroin. She was using heroin around me all the time. Um, and then shooting up around me. She shot me up with cocaine, but it wasn't until after I broke up with her that I started using heroin, because I had great disdain for it for a long time, but just they started regulating Oxycontin, and I kind of had to move to heroin to get that same buzz. Now, there's like many of my friends, past tense, their memories are still here, but they died as a result of taking drugs that were not fentanyl, not sold as fentanyl in any case, but were cut with fentanyl. Because I think the thing was, when it kind of came out, dealers had this idea that if they were to cut drugs that weren't physically addictive, like cocaine or MDMA, with fentanyl, then their customers would become addicts and they would become return customers, and then they realize, oh hey, we're killing everyone by doing this. Yeah, real smart drug dealers. Anyways, I know multiple people took MDMA, died either right there or ended up in the ICU and just barely clung on for like a week, and died, kicked the bucket. Same with cocaine. Thought they were doing cocaine. Dropped them. Never got up. And it's a very unfortunate thing. These types of deaths. Like, I was just with like a friend of mine for a long time, or someone I thought was a friend, anyways. And his father was like a second father to me, and he was struggling with addiction for a long time, and he was finally starting to make steps in overcoming it, trying to rebuild the relationship that he had kind of cast away by his choosing drugs over, being a father. And I talked to him maybe 6 months ago or so, and, he was very much objected about the state that he was in. He hated the fact that he was an addict on the downtown east side, and he wanted out so bad, but it's just such a hard road to get out of. It took me a very long time to do so. He had obviously been using for much longer than I had. So he would take me to like monster truck rallies and stuff like that. And I just had a blast with him. Like this crazy instance once where he called me up to buy him some weed and picked me up, and we just like were in this car and or his truck, and his car pulled up beside us while we were singing to Killer Queen on the radio. That car was doing the same thing. And it was two chicks. They were both smoking hot chicks. One of them was about 5 years older than me. One of the most drop-dead gorgeous women I have ever seen in my life. The other was an older one, and we both just started talking, and his dad was like, "Yo, babe, follow us, you want to party?" And I was like, I was kind of young. I was, I think, like 16, 17, and it's like, oh shit. And we actually ended up having a blast, and I actually hooked up with this chick a couple times despite her living out in I believe Maple Ridge. Yeah, so I mean, this guy, like, he's had an indelible impact on my life. But the day after, he tries to like essentially rekindle a relationship with his son in a sober living facility. He pulls out his fentanyl, does a couple tokes, and his heart stops. And when you get that news, it sucks the air out of you, because it's hard to find meaning in such deaths, and especially closure, because you can't talk to them. They're not there anymore. They're dead, and the way they died is just there's not much to it. They took a drug and they dropped. It's hard to extrapolate anything, like I said, of meaning from those instances, and it's very hard, especially on people who are directly affected by it, like his son, this family members, people who are very, very close, and I considered myself a family member with him, and he kind of said he was like a second father to me, and like even when he was like using like pretty hard and was in downtown East Side, and which is where all the addicts are known to be and known to use, kind of out in the open. They're sort of relegated there by society in some circumstances, and others, that's just where they end up because the supplies are everywhere, and they, for the most part, don't like it. But as far as I can tell, the only good thing the government's done is supply the legal injection facilities and the needle exchange, because that's reduced the amount of needles in just litter on the streets, like substantially. I mean, there's still a lot of needles everywhere in Vancouver. There's needles in public school playgrounds and pretty much every bush, so you have to be very careful, but it still has reduced it by like a substantial amount, as I said. Now, the supervised injection facilities, they've decreased overdose quite a bit because they have trained staff, who are there making sure that if someone drops, they can hit them with Narcan. They have a nurse on staff, and it's good and all, but like, these addicts are still doing like dirty supplies, and like essentially, like I said with the Tizalam, if they overdose on that, there's no way they can bring them back. So, that is essentially providing like a band-aid, a temporary fix. What I think we need to do is kind of what Portugal and Switzerland have been doing, and that's like more so Portugal, because they have these programs where it's like, okay, we'll give you heroin, we'll give you cocaine, whatever your drugs of choice are, if you either get a job or you engage in communal activity with other addicts. And they actually found that in those communal activities, addicts were less likely to be late to steal from one another, and to steal from the resources being supplied. So they would usually get them to work on construction projects. And this was all taken from Carl Hart's study on where he essentially debunked the bogus cocaine trials that were carried out by the U.S. government in, I believe, the 70s, where they got lab rats, and these lab rats, they were put in just like a single cage and given cocaine, and they just did it until they died, essentially. And then Carl Hart was like, okay, but that's, you're essentially putting them into an existence where the only thing is cocaine. There are no alternatives. And so he put a communal area in these cages and allowed it so the lab rats could run around in these tubes and get exercise, and found that the vast majority didn't use the cocaine provided, only the ones who are kind of like the misfits of the group. So I think that's kind of what we need to do, because, the downtown east side now is like, it's like a cage, essentially. It's this cage, and people know nothing but the drug use that constantly surrounds them. It's a very unfortunate existence, and that's why people are using drugs as powerful as fentanyl, because they don't want to acknowledge the nature of their existence. That's how I see it, and that's why I don't judge too harshly when it comes to people who are addicts. And I really think if we don't initiate something like a communal project with a supervised injection site that supplies the drugs, then, we're just not going to get this cat back in the bag. It's a Pandora's box type situation. So I'll just keep regurgitating metaphors, as you know, but it seriously is. Like, the thing is, one of the reasons heroin is so like hard to find. It's not synthetic, it needs an opium crop for it to be produced. And now that we don't have the U.S. military looking after the opium crops in Afghanistan, then where's it coming from, That, and, there is a preference for fentanyl. Fentanyl being synthetic, Chinese labs produce it, and they sell it to addicts who are keyed into the source. I've had emails, because I bought a lot of drugs over, the internet, dark web, over the years, and I've had labs offer me in emails, like a kilo of fentanyl or whatever. And I've never bought any because I don't want any of that shit. Thank you very much. I have a hate. It's like in my bones for that fucking drug, and the people that are pushing it, and the people who are doing nothing about it, because it's killing more people than COVID in my country. And look at all the austere measures we've taken for COVID. Why can't we like establish some help for addicts? Because the thing is, if we don't get people clean heroin soon, and this is the difference between clean heroin and straight heroin. Like, I've seen what it looks like in documentaries, particularly one on the Switzerland injection facility. It's like a clean white liquid, or not white, transparent liquid, and then heroin. I've seen heroin lots because I've done heroin lots. I've never done black tar heroin. You wouldn't get black tar heroin in my city, but it's usually brown, clumpy, or sometimes beige and clumpy, and it looks disgusting. It doesn't look appetizing in any way unless you are an addict and you know the effects of it. But I think if we don't do something soon, we're hooped. This is never going to end, and it's just going to spin more and more wildly out of control. And I've seen the government try a little bit. Like, doctors have been giving people Dilaudid. They've been giving people who are now addicted to Tislam clonazepam to try and get off of it. But here's the thing: those people, because it's not supervised, they just go down to a corner downtown where people sell pills and just flip their pills. And now that that's happened, because I used to buy Dilaudid when I found out that fentanyl was in everything. I knew they wouldn't be in Dilaudid because these are pills pressed by a pharmaceutical company, and Dilaudid were pretty similar to heroin for the most part. Um, and you could crush them up and inject them very easily. They're probably the most abusable out of any of the prescription pills when it comes to IV use. They used to be like $10 a pill for an 8 milligram. Now they're like $1.50 because everyone's got them, and no one's actually using them because they want fentanyl instead. So like this seriously needs to be addressed, and there are other avenues that we could use, like you know like I work for a guy who does a wonderful service for his community. He supplies clean drugs, and he tries to offer stuff like psychedelics and weed as an alternative to hard drugs. Um, and yeah, I've seen with my own eyes addicts who have this countenance, someone who's been using for 20 years or so. They're gray uh, in their pallor. They have, kind of protruding cheekbones, jawbones, kind of hunched sort of gait. They're doing the shuffle as they walk, because their body has been altered by these drugs. So I've seen, like with one guy, that's a sign that you've been using for a long time, 10 years or so. This one guy's like, oh, you got acid, man. Is that right? And he's like, yeah, man, I got acid. And he's like, dude, I've done acid since I was a kid, man. And he's like, oh, shit, well, give me some of that acid. And so, some acid, every time he's been coming back, he's been just getting psychedelics. And, I think that, there's a lot of, for one, psychedelics are providing a form of therapy for people who aren't getting the right therapeutic treatment if they have concurrent disorder. And so they take a psychedelic and they're immediately confronting in the introspective phases all the things they wouldn't confront otherwise because of the numbing effects of the drugs they're doing. Their drugs of choice, particularly being opiates or hardcore uppers like speed or crack. Um, so you're also giving them, you're substituting a drug that gives them a serotonergic effect as well. So it's combating the PAWS, the PAWS, that heroin use particularly, or opioid use in general, causes if you're an addict. You stop using and you go into the worst depression of your life after you've gotten through the acute withdrawals. And so it is very helpful in that regard. And it's also, been shown to have these, neurogenerative effects, neuroregenerative effects, sorry. But yeah, so it's like reestablishing pathways that are somewhat damaged. It's making new pathways. It's introducing stem cells into the brain, so they're fixing a lot of what bad drug use has damage that would otherwise be irreparable. So I think that psychedelics are key when it comes to fixing these issues. Not everyone should be using them though, because a lot of people who are addicts and have concurrent disorder, which is a mental health issue and addiction. So they're using because they want to treat what hasn't been treated, that mental health issue. And they're just doing what they know works. And that just ultimately will exacerbate the issue over the years. But yeah, anyways, it is actually a blessing. It is a gift, psychedelics, what they can do for addicts. But because of the absurd schedule in my country, you can't do any clinical trials. You can't give psychedelics to addicts. My addiction doctor, who I gotta say, I really don't like the guy. He seems to have not really care about me and other people, and he seems to treat me like a long-term addict. And because I use psychedelics, he thinks it's the same thing as heroin, cocaine. And that's generally the attitude. So they're of course not going to even consider, getting you in line with a psychologist to do, say, LSD psychotherapy or anything like that, and work through the underlying traumas which have been seeded within people and which are feeding this addictive mentality and this addictive behavior. And like, the pharmaceutical companies are and doctors are promoting the use of methadone, Suboxone, maintenance opioids. These things are not good. They are only promoting the issues. I remember when I was on methadone as an addict, they put me on methadone at 16, by the way. That was before I was physically addicted to anything. Methadone was the first thing I was physically addicted to. Yeah, wrap your head around that. But here's the thing about methadone. If you're on a high enough dose, and you're using opioids, say opiates or opioids, for me it's mostly opiates because it was heroin coming from opium being an organic product. That's the difference between opioids and opiates. Opioids are synthetic, opiates are from an organic product. So I was able to do heroin about once a day and just fall back on the methadone. Methadone would keep me out of withdrawal, so it essentially um, it was able to prolong my use without consequence, which that's not what it's there for. And Suboxone, it just creates a host of other issues because if you take an opiate or opioid and then you take Suboxone, you will go into precipitated withdrawal. I've been in it multiple times. It's the most painful thing any human being can endure. It's awful. You black out from the pain. You're supposed to be under anesthesia so bad. It's the worst thing I've experienced in my life. I've experienced it far too many times, I think. Most of the time I did experience it was when I was transitioning from like morphine or methadone to Suboxone. And so the only thing that can cut through the Suboxone when you're in precipitated withdrawal, fentanyl. So the majority of the times I used fentanyl was when I was in that state. And I knew it was the only thing that was strong enough to kick the Suboxone off my receptors and get me out of it. But then I've still got to get myself back on the Suboxone. So you see, it creates this vicious cycle that just perpetuates. And I almost think this is intentional because Suboxone, it came from Purdue Pharma, and Purdue Pharma were the ones who were essentially responsible for the opioid epidemic with OxyContin. And then after that started, they said, oh, hey, look at this, we have a magical little thing called buprenorphine. We're calling it Suboxone. You put it under your tongue, makes the withdrawals go away, and you're good to go. But they make people addicts for life with this, and there's also a myriad of other issues I have with Suboxone, but I'll talk about that later because the context is different. But yeah, I think, seriously, just to wrap this up, because I've been going on for a while now, we need to do something because, this is affecting absolutely everyone. Everyone. Drug addiction, it doesn't discriminate on class, race, anything like that. It's, if you have any sort of vulnerability, if you've been peer pressured into it, you will become an addict. It doesn't matter how good and reliable you think your sense of resolve is, you can become a drug addict too. And you can die the way a drug addict dies. It's that simple. It crosses all sorts of thresholds because, even if someone doesn't live in an area where, dealing and addiction is rife, they can easily get a script from their doctor and become an addict. It's that simple. And then they'll go to where the sources are because their use doesn't meet the amount they're being prescribed. So, yeah, I really hope that we can get some real action from this because, I know a lot of people who are trying. I regularly interact with places that are trying, with people who are trying, but we can't because of this just intense, just pressure of the government's boot heel down on anyone who is a drug user, regardless of what capacity you're a drug user. Like it's pretty disturbing. Yeah. So anyways, that's all I'm gonna say. I could go on, but yeah, this is a serious issue. We need to pay attention to it. We need to address it. Let's do it. Synthetic, not so spiritual shaman, wishing you good morning wherever you are. Bye bye.